Let's talk about it. Used to work in repo a long, long time ago.
Very long time ago.
What is it?
I don't think anyone has quite understood what's going on, but I agree with what Tom just said. I think it doesn't matter whether we think that there is QE going on or not, but I think there's no question that interest rates are being very closely manipulated. QE is being very closely manipulated to affect the mood following the mood of investors versus the other way around.
Well, let's talk about outcomes. What does it ultimately mean? Risk assets have ripped, largely on a central bank pivot from the Federal Reserve, but also on hopes that things get better, and some evidence so far that they are. Is it all just about a balance sheet operation, or at least the perception that the Fed is doing a whole lot more than maybe it is?
I think also if the earnings report are starting to come out, and what is, I think, surprising people is that earnings are starting to look better than what we expected at this time of the year. The banks, of course, had incredible earnings, part of it because of trading gains, but part of it also those who did not have regulatory issues and did not lose on that made money across lots of different areas. They lost some on things like loan losses, but across the board they gained on other areas. I think you are seeing the move towards equities still in the market, but also a big push towards private equity and investing in new companies through venture.
Yeah. So much to talk about, Afsaneh, in too short a time, including your expertise on energy within international economics. We'll get to that in a bit. The money call off of Q4 is finally international equity woke up, international bond woke up. The money question John and I hear every day in New York is, does international finally have legs to get an impulse, to have a return to what we've seen in the United States returns? Is it for real?
I think it's for real. I think what is very interesting, if you listen to Mrs. Merkel really carefully last week, there seems to be a push away from that incredible austerity program that has been present in parts of Europe, and sort of that sense that you cannot invest and increase your deficits. So I think other countries in Europe and Asia are taking a page out of the US and China book, where there is much less discipline on generating a deficit, investing across different areas, and maybe doing more infrastructure, even in Europe. I think there's a lot of talk now between the green economy and just the general lack of investment in infrastructure to push a lot of money into those areas.
Well, let's get into it, Afsaneh, because it's not a conspiracy theory. It's a real story that people are starting to discuss, that a lot of these governments in Europe could start issuing green bonds, use that money to invest in a whole range of things, including highways in places like Germany, and I understand from Germans that they really need that right now. And then the ECB could buy the bonds.
Yes.
Do you think that could happen?
I don't think it's impossible. I mean, they have invested in, ECB has bought government bonds. They bought World Bank bonds. We used to issue World Bank bonds. That is a multilateral institution backed by G7. So I wouldn't be surprised if they did. But I think they're not going to be the biggest buyers. There's going to be a lot of institutional investors with huge amounts of liquidity that are standing by to invest.
At the World Bank, you've provided leadership at JP Morgan as well on energy economics, almost differently than the historical template of, say, Dan Yergin. To your Iranian heritage, I want to look at a river down into the Persian Gulf.
She'll be very unhappy.
Iran is on one side. Iraq. Iranian. I got it right. You've got Iran on one side, Iraq on the other side. Explain to our audience the nuance of those energy assets and the best outcome for all.
So there is, in terms of energy, obviously, you have plenty of natural gas and oil on all sides. Iran, I think, is one of the largest owners of natural gas reserves still today. A lot gets flared. And I think the bigger issue, actually, that has been the cause for conflict between those two countries historically over, and I mean hundreds and hundreds of years, has been water rights, not oil. And I think, as we're talking about climate here and everyone is concentrated on climate, we don't talk a lot about water. But we're going to have major issues over water, whether it's in the U.S., between states, or between countries.
What's happening right now in the Middle East, in Iran, with regards to that? How bad is it?
The water situation is really bad. You may not even be able to get water up into your apartment if you don't have enough pressure just because of the lack of water. And I think what has happened is over the last 20, 30 years, what you've, and I'm not an expert on the water situation in Iran, but World Resources Institute does a great map. If you look at water shortage across the Middle East, all of the countries there are red. They're not yellow, they're not orange, they're red. So it's a pretty dire situation.
So when you synthesize this debate, Ms. Beschloss, the clarity has to be the president has sanctions as a tool, discussed in the press conference today to Baghdad, or the reality to Tehran as well. Are sanctions an efficacious way to get things done for the United States?
You know, I have read a lot about sanctions, and I think apart from South Africa, where it worked,
exactly, it worked,
but it was landlocked. The countries that have a waterway have a much harder. And look at Russia right now. Russia has had sanctions, and Russian markets were up hugely, better than most markets last year.
John, this is so important. The shock of everyone when we went, oh, the sanctions in South Africa worked.
Yes.
And this is discrete from that. Yeah.
So you're essentially saying it won't work in Iran?
I don't think it works really. It makes poor people poorer. It makes rich people richer. Sanctions do that across all countries because they will take benefit of the black markets in whatever goods. And it creates a lot of sad situations with, you know, and people not having drugs and medicine and things like that available. But will it change governments or will it change, you know, economies? We're not seeing that. And I've never seen that. And I've read a lot of books on sanctions.